What if there was a podcast that did it all? Sports, politics, world events. Well, that's what we've got. You're listening to C&C Talks.
Hello, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie.
Welcome to episode 14 of the C&C Talks podcast.
Just a reminder, we record and release usually on Tuesday, but not this week. This is the last week that's going to happen because we'll be back on a regular schedule next week, hopefully. And we talk about politics, world events, and sports. It is currently Tuesday, August 30th at around 9 a.m. Pacific time.
Yep. And we're going to start with the biggest news, which is that Joe Biden has canceled a lot of student debt, up to $10,000 per borrower, actually. This is for people who are making up to $125,000 a year. And Charlie, honestly, what I found most interesting about this decision was actually the response from the Republican Party, who is, for various reasons, against this decision. But right, it's something that helps people who actually need it, but the GOP's reaction has just been absolutely nuts.
No, yeah, they're saying that the people have to pay off their debts, which is actually interesting considering that several members of the Republicans in Congress have unforgiven PPP loans, and Trump has declared bankruptcy 6 times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to call them hypocrites, but
that's what you're doing, essentially.
They're hypocrites.
Yeah, they're also claiming that it's unfair to people who have already finished paying off their student loans, even though that college prices have risen by large amounts in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think also the best comparison to, it's unfair to people who have already finished paying off their debt is like, you have this severe illness. Well, we could treat you with this medicine, but that would be unfair to all of the people who had this disease before this medicine came around.
Yeah. We have some important primary results that have released. Can we get some more on that, Colin?
Yeah, so we're going to start in New York. Jerry Nadler won his House primary. He's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He was actually running against Carolyn Maloney. We talked about this race, I think, last week. She's the chair of the Oversight Committee in the House. They were drawn together into the same district because of redistricting. So those are two of the most important committees in the House. So now only one of those chairs is left. Also, there was the primary in Florida for the Democratic gubernatorial race. This is to run against Ron DeSantis in the general election. And Charlie Crist won that primary by a significant amount, defeating the Florida Agriculture Commissioner, Nikki Fried, she is the only current official in Florida right now that has been elected statewide. Every other statewide elected position in Florida right now is currently filled by a Republican.
So can we get some more on Crist and what he's done before?
Yeah, so he used to be the governor of Florida, actually, from 2007 to 2011. He's now running for that position again. But what's interesting is that when he's held that position, he was a Republican. Now he switched parties since then. He's now a Democrat. He's also currently a member of the House, but now running for governor again.
So is the party shift in terms of he actually changed his policies, or is it strategic wise because he knew he couldn't beat DeSantis in a primary?
Well, so it was longer ago than that he changed parties.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that because I was remembering there was a thing in the primaries for the last presidential election where there was a couple of people who were Republicans who decided to try for the Democratic primary because they knew that the Republican voters wouldn't put anyone up other than Trump.
Yeah. Also, Laura Loomer in Florida, she has lost her House primary. This is an extreme far-right candidate who naturally has been endorsed by former President Trump. But she's refusing to concede because that's the Republican way now. You lose your election, you refuse to concede, claim fraud. And she's also saying that the person that she was challenging should now resign in disgrace from the House, and that that her voters should not vote for them in the general election, which could very much benefit the Democrats in that district.
Yes. And we also have some more news in the investigation into Trump. The affidavit for a Mar-a-Lago search warrant was released. It was heavily redacted, and Colin has some more on that.
Yeah, so what it did show was that the Department of Justice is investigating Trump for many crimes, including possible obstruction and for some extreme violations of the Presidential Records Act, which we already knew he had classified documents, right? Top secret documents, potentially nuclear secrets. And that's something that he's not allowed to hold. And I think it's worth pointing out that, Charlie, if you or I were to have those documents, we would already be in jail.
Yep.
Right? Because it's a crime. It's in violation of the Presidential Records Act. But also, Trump and his allies seem to realize that there's probably going to be an indictment soon. And by soon, I think I mean probably we're still a few months away, but it's probably going to happen. And they're already laying the groundwork for unrest afterwards. Lindsey Graham is calling for riots in the streets if Trump gets indicted, which is A, below the office of a senator, and B, that's a crime. That's incitement, right? That's the same thing that Trump did in the lead up to January 6th, and the reason why we almost lost our democracy on that day.
The U.S. is heading down a very dangerous path at the moment.
Yeah.
And to finish our politics segment, we have a retirement. Anthony Fauci will retire in December. You may remember him. He was in the news quite a lot in 2020 and 2021. He was the nation's top infectious disease expert for decades, and he often gave advice about COVID.
Yep, and one more election, actually. This was not a primary. This was a special election in upstate New York. This was to replace a Democratic representative who had retired to become the new lieutenant governor of New York, because Kathy Hochul, the lieutenant governor of New York, became the governor of New York when Andrew Cuomo resigned in disgrace. This was a district that went slightly for Biden in 2020, and it was expected to be won by a Republican. This time it was actually won by a Democrat by about the same margin as Biden. And something that we've seen a lot is since the Roe v. Wade decision, since it was overturned, lots of House special elections have been going more towards the Democrats than the Biden margin back in 2020, whereas before that, it was going farther towards the right by a lot, by sometimes like 10, 20 points further to the right than the results in 2020 had showed. So this is really good news for Democrats. And while we're still over 2 months away from the midterms, which is an eternity in politics, that is a sign that the Democrats could have a very good midterm elections.
Yes.
Now, I have something to tell you about, which is that you can now ask us questions by submitting a form to our site, that's cctalks.net, or we also now have a phone number, which is 360-389-2630. That is 360-389-2630. So Give us a call, ask us your questions.
And now on to sports. We have news from both the Seattle football team and baseball team. We'll start with the bigger of the two news, and that is Julio Rodriguez, rising Mariners talent, and as Colin would call him, generational talent, has now signed a contract through 2034 at minimum, with options that could go through 2038 at 39.
Now the U.S. Open, and then after that we'll talk about some Formula One to close out this episode. But the U.S. Open, Serena Williams is playing what is likely her final tournament. Obviously, just a legendary career, 23 Grand Slams, the greatest tennis player to ever play the sport. She won her first round match Monday. Second round match was tonight against Annette Kontaveit, the number 2 ranked player in the world right now. She's also going to play doubles with her sister Venus Williams for the first time in several years. Novak Djokovic, the number 1 ranked player for the men, he cannot play because he's unvaccinated, so he cannot get into the United States. On Monday, we're recording this Tuesday, so we don't know the results from that day yet, but on Monday there were some major upsets, including the number 4 ranked male player Stefanos Tsitsipas and the number 7 ranked women's player Simona Halep. Now let's move on to Formula One.
Yes, F1 is finally back from summer break, so I can stop being sad and watching NASCAR on Sundays, which is objectively worse.
Why would you watch that? That's
because
terrible.
It's racing and I had nothing to do. So we had an interesting grid. Drivers like Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Ocon, and I believe it was Schumacher who was taking engine penalties. They started way at the back. So we had some midfield teams starting up at the front with a good opportunity to score. Everyone expected that Perez and Sainz would be fighting it from the front, and Leclerc and Verstappen, the two really championship contenders at this point. I say contenders because Verstappen's leading by 90 points. But it was actually not a very eventful race. Lap 1 and Lap 2 were interesting, with Hamilton getting launched into the air by jumping over the front tire of Alonso, knocking him out of the race. And in lap 2, Latifi spun and hit Bottas, and Bottas got stranded in the gravel. But then after that, nothing much happened. Verstappen just surged through the field and beating his teammate by 18 seconds in an absolutely amazing show of speed. Really boring race. Another blunder for Ferrari. They were caught speeding in the pit lane and were given a penalty, which dropped Leclerc from 5th to 6th behind Fernando Alonso, losing him 2 more points to Verstappen. So instead of being down by 94 points, now they're down 96 points. And this is the first race of a triple header. Next week, or this weekend actually now, will be a race in the Netherlands at the Circuit Zandvoort on the Dutch coast. And then the week after that, we'll go back to Italy for the second and final race in Italy at Monza, before a 3-week gap, and then Singapore, mainly because Russia, which was supposed to be in between Monza and Singapore, has now been banned from holding F1 events.
And do you know if that's permanent, by the way, or is that just for this year?
It was just for this year or until they stopped, but now the country has been banned until the FIA reverses the decision.
So you don't think that they'll be back next year?
I do not. I think they will find other places, because there's 3 circuits coming back next year. Qatar's coming back. They were hosting the World Cup for the first time in a very long time, since the I believe it's either the 70s or the 80s. We're racing at South Africa and Kyalami again. And then that's going to replace France most likely. And then we have a night race in Las Vegas, which would be the 3rd circuit in the U.S.
So that is going to close out our episodes for today. Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure that you subscribe. We have episodes available normally on Tuesdays, anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. Check out our new website and submit your questions at cctalks.net, and give us a call at 360-389-2630 and leave us your questions there. Make sure to also follow us on Twitter at CC Talks Podcast. For our producer Morris, production designer Zack, and our co-writer Drake, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie. See you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Goodbye.